Hello, chess fans. Today I'm going to show you one of the most spectacular moves Viswanathan Anand has ever played. In fact, I would consider it probably his greatest move and one of the greatest chess moves of all time. His opponent in this game will be the French Grandmaster Jules Lautier, who retired surprisingly early but was for many years the strongest player in France. He's also a very combative player, and we can really enjoy how he never backs down from a fight in this very short and exciting game in the Scandinavian defense. Anand opens with e4, which we've seen him do many times. Something new is d5, which Lautier plays here. With d5, he introduces the Scandinavian defense. Certainly, the Scandinavian is very trendy these days on the amateur level, but it's not often seen at the highest level. However, Anand does have experience in the Scandinavian and has played this line against none other than Garry Kasparov in the World Championship. So it's quite gutsy for Jules Lautier to attempt the Scandinavian against Anand when he knows that he's going to have done more preparation than any other top-level player in this particular, usually uncommon opening. After queen a5, instead of the kind of more modern queen d6 and queen d8 variations, we get some classic moves, d4, natural knight developments, and then c6. My personal opinion is that c6 isn't optimal here. This is a very natural and important move in the Scandinavian defense because you want to control d5, you want to control b5, and you want to gain a retreat for your queen on c7. Makes total sense. However, I prefer to wait until white plays bishop d2 before I consider throwing in c6. I would prefer to play bishop f5 on this move in the Scandinavian defense. On a good day, I might get knight c6 and castles queenside in. So after c6, we get bishop c4, bishop f5, and now knight e5. This is a line that Anand said he had looked at in his match against Kasparov and found it to be quite a challenging one that he had to spend a lot of time preparing against. So here he busts out his theory against Lautier and gets to reveal the stuff that he was studying in that critical match. So often knight e5, which is sometimes played on move 6 instead of move 7 here in the Scandinavian defense, we no longer have the ability to play knight to d7 because this f7 pawn is hanging. So e6 must be played to defend f7, and then we're able to go after the bishop on g6 with pawn g4. We've gained time for this. Now, this bishop is exposed. We've got an interesting thing here. We often in chess, you get something, you give something. Here, black has managed to get the bishop out of the pawn chain. Thumbs up. We like that. We don't want to trap the bishop back on c8 in behind those pawns. On the other hand, the bishop can become exposed outside of the pawn chain, which is the case here. So you get something, you give something. The bishop is outside the pawn chain, but it's also a target now. It retreats to g6, and h4 goes after the bishop. The trapping of that bishop, which is kind of now threatened with h5, becomes a major theme in this opening. So black challenges the knight on e5. Excellent move. We need to do this absolutely. Knight takes d7, knight takes d7, h5, and bishop e4. Of course, the knight on c3 is pinned, so there is no hanging bishop on e4 to be captured. Rook h3 is a nice rook lift. It reminds me a bit of Tau versus Botvinnik, another famous game where Tau played a rook h3 rook lift. The bishop moves, and here's an interesting point. And if you haven't yet, I absolutely recommend going and getting Anand's Best Games collection, where he analyzes this game and his other games. His notes are incredible. He talks about how he had prepared rook g3, but at the board he decided he actually liked the move rook e3 instead. So rook g3 is a solid move, but at some point a tempo would be lost as the bishop comes to d6. So at the board, he decided instead to go for this rook e3 move. Now, this was actually a great point for Lautier to castle queenside. And if he castles queenside, this opening could be deemed a success for black. Black is probably equalized and has a very solid position. However, both players can play for a win in the resulting position. It should still be an exciting game from this point forward. Instead, rook e3 opens up a forcing line that looks really good for black on first glance, and Lautier goes for it. So he neglects castling here to go for this tempting line, possibly miscalculating some things along the way, and we'll find that he won't get another good chance to castle in this game. Knight b6, not a bad move yet. Bishop d3 and knight d5 is a very, very strong move. Knight d5 attacks the rook on e3 and the knight on c3, and it looks like the position is just about winning for black. However, Anand has seen this position coming when he played rook e3, and he anticipated a brilliant idea. He plays pawn f3 to go after the bishop on g2 with this idea of king f2 and king takes g2. So he's just letting black take the rook on e3 because he realizes he's going to trap the bishop. I think this is absolutely fantastic. You don't often see the king employed in this way, so this is a wonderful, wonderful idea. It's like if the president of the United States was actually going out and conducting missions. It's like if Obama went on the SEAL Team 6 mission to go after bin Laden himself or something like that. The king is taking an active role in an exciting middle game and just venturing straight into this open side of the board to capture this bishop himself. Hilarious. So after f3, one thing that I think is interesting is this line, knight takes e3, bishop takes e3, and bishop a3. This is a hilarious move, right? Bishop a3, undermining this pawn to go after this. However, this is not the end of the line, and after a capture here, rather than capturing here when the bishop is trapped, as we've been discussing, and is trapped in a way that is pretty good for white, we can throw in the move bishop takes f3, trying to get white to take, and then we can take with check, and then queen d2 is the best move defending the knight. So at this point in the game, white has a knight and a bishop against a rook and a pawn. This is generally a favorable imbalance for white. However, black has a very good pawn structure here, and this pawn on a3 makes a particularly poor impression. I do think that white has the advantage. I really don't think that's up for debate, but this is a very muddy position, and I think a lot could happen here. At this point, I think that going for this variation or another one like it, because there are many alternatives that black could have picked to pick up this, rook and pawns for the two minor pieces, would be the right thing to do. But Lautier senses that this is going to be a difficult position for him, and he rejects it throughout. Unfortunately, eventually, he goes too far, and he rejects his last chance to get a position like this. So after f3, going to trap the bishop, Lautier doesn't capture on e3 yet. Instead, he plays bishop b4, increasing the pressure on c3. Anand plays king f2, going after that bishop like we were just discussing, and bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, queen takes c3, hits the rook on a1, the rook moves and attacks b7, captures on d4, captures on b7. So that was a long sequence of relatively forced captures up to this point here. And now Lautier plays rook d8, which leads to the amazing finish in the game. So after rook d8, Anand thought for a while about a move that I'm not going to spoil quite yet, but you can look in the notes to see why the key move did not work in this position. Instead, Anand played the brilliant move pawn to h6 here. So after pawn to h6, Lautier didn't suspect what was going on. He really needed to go ahead and take on e3, although the position is possibly already lost, likely already lost. And he went ahead and captured on h6. At this point, I really think you should pause your videos if you haven't seen this move yet and try to figure out what Anand played. So, I'm assuming that you, like Anand, are absolutely brilliant and you found the move bishop g6. A spectacular move that leaves the queen hanging on d1 to create an incredible mating net with the white rooks and bishops. Absolutely beautiful. The king on e8 suddenly becomes the critical thing in the game. At this point, there's no way to save the position for black, although Lautier tries for a few moves. The main point is that if black takes the queen sacrifice, there's simply rook takes e6 check. It doesn't change anything to block with a knight, so I'm just going to go ahead and move the king over to f8, and then bishop takes h6, king here is forced, and bishop takes f7. You saw how the bishop on h6 was critical to this checkmate, a beautiful checkmate, and that's why the move h6 was included. So amazing, amazing combination, beautiful idea with bishop g6 here. After bishop g6, Lautier played knight to e7, and there are many ways to win at this point. Anand picks a nice clean way. Queen takes d4, and rook d3. He uses a little lifeline tactic here. Rather than retreating the bishop right away, he offers an exchange of rooks to get rid of black's active rook. And if the rooks are traded, his bishop will simply retreat safely. Instead, Lautier plays rook d8, but after rook takes, king takes bishop d3. It's the same thing. 6 of one, half dozen of the other, and the bishop is getting trapped. If it tries running to h1, then simply bishop e2 and king g1 would be at least one way to go ahead and pick off that bishop. Realizing that the bishop is trapped at this point, Lautier surrendered the game, resigning in this position on move 25. I hope you enjoyed this game as much as I did. If you want to check out more of Anand's brilliant games, you can just click on some over here on the board. Check out the playlist of his incredible games and subscribe to the channel for future videos on Anand's career. We're walking through it chronologically and picking some of his greatest games that I really, really enjoy. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again in a future video.